Welcome to our Hope Meetup. I'm Fabrice Florin, Director of Green Change, our Bay Area Climate Action Network. We're honored that so many of you are joining us for this community meetup about hope from all over the Bay Area, the U.S., and around the world. Tonight, we will hear from some inspiring speakers. Sci-fi writer Kim Stanley Robinson will tell us why he's hopeful that we can solve climate change, and climate activists Alma, Soongi, Beck, and Harita, Kalvai will talk about the importance of art, hope, and joy to inspire climate action and justice. And we're grateful to the Green Change team for making this event possible, and to all our partners and community members who kindly support our work. Here's our agenda for tonight. We'll feature 3 talks on a wide range of topics and have a group discussion about what gives you hope at the end of the hour, followed by community tips for climate action. For those of you who are new to Green Change, welcome. We're a climate action network in the San Francisco Bay Area where we help each other live sustainably and fight climate change. We serve a growing community of thousands of concerned citizens like you in California and beyond. Each year, we organize 4 quarterly campaigns, as we did in 2022. Regeneration, Earth 2050, Electrify Everything, and Save Democracy. Each of our campaigns kicks off with a public event like this one, and we follow it up with online content, which includes guides and green tips on climate action, such as clean energy and transportation, eating sustainably, and living lightly. Our big event, which is coming up, is Earth Day Marin, to which you are all invited. It'll be a big environmental festival, and we hope that you can make it. And we'll tell you more about this a little bit later. So we invite you to take action with us, and you can always visit our site and subscribe at greenchange.net. So our theme tonight is hope, which we think is essential for solving climate change. As our planet burns and democracy is under attack, it's natural to feel depressed and to fear the worst. Many of us worry that time is running out to stop our climate and political crises. And yet, recent developments suggest that we are making real progress on climate inequity and that we have much to be hopeful for. Here are just a few good reasons for hope. The cost of renewables and energy storage is dropping rapidly, which will save families money on energy. Electric vehicles are on the rise. EV sales have skyrocketed around the world. Global demand for fossil fuels has peaked, displaced by more efficient clean energy. U.S. Congress just passed a historic climate bill, the $369 billion Inflation Reduction Act, the largest investment in climate action we've ever made. It's projected to help reduce greenhouse emissions to about 40% below 2005 levels by 2030. Similar investments are also underway in Europe, China, Japan, and around the world. Many cities and towns are taking leadership in climate action in their areas. Climate action is creating tens of millions of new, well-paying jobs. Most people are taking climate action every day, and our movement keeps growing. Young activists are speaking up loud and clear, taking to the streets in over 600 cities last year and suing governments for failing to protect them from climate pollution. More people now demand climate justice for marginalized people who contribute the least to the problem but suffer the most. And good news for nature, nearly 200 countries in Montreal just pledged to stop the destruction of the vital ecosystems on which we all depend and to forge a peace pact with nature at long last. Signs of hope are everywhere. Of course, there's still a huge amount of work to do, but the green transition has begun and a new sustainable era is dawning. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. And we will learn how each of us can make a difference by taking hopeful climate action and getting businesses and governments to do the same. So we invite you to go beyond individual climate action and to also take collective or political action to protect our future. To learn more, you can check our climate action guides, which are linked in text chat. As Joan Baez famously said, action is the antidote to despair. Each of us can help change the world we live in. Join your neighbors to help turn this crisis around with a hopeful, joyful, and positive mindset. And now I would like to introduce our inspiring speakers. Our keynote speaker, science fiction writer Kim Stanley Robinson, will talk about the power of optimism for solving climate change. Climate activist and performer Alma Soongi Beck will tell us how she inspires joyful action to end the climate crisis. Young organizer Harita Kalvai will talk about how she engages youth through art to create a better world and about intersectionality in climate activism. They will share their insights about finding hope in times of crisis and taking action to protect our future. And at the end of the hour, we'll also discuss what gives you hope and share community tips for climate actions we can take in our own lives. To get us started, it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Kim Stanley Robinson. He is the renowned author of The Ministry for the Future, the acclaimed science fiction novel about how we might solve climate change in our lifetime. Set a couple decades into the future, the novel looks back at how we tackled this crisis through radical climate actions such as carbon coins, geoengineering, even eco-terrorism, enabling us to restore our damaged biosphere and replace capitalism with a worldview that values life over profit. Though it is fiction, the book is based on science and really well researched, giving us a rousing vision of how we might unite to overcome the greatest challenge of our time. If you haven't read the book yet, I invite you to get it at the link in text chat. You might also like Stan's latest book, The High Sierra, a love story about his hiking adventures and communion with nature in the Sierra Nevada. Tonight, Stan will speak about hope and community and how they can help solve our multiple crises and how each of us can make a difference by taking climate action in our own lives. Take it away, Stan.
All right. Thank you, Fabrice. And thank you, Green Change of Marin County. I'm just over the hill in Davis, California, and it's easier to talk about hope in the current crisis with Marin County and California in general as a kind of a focal point and orientation. And also, I wouldn't be surprised if it's most of the people watching here. Marin County has famously got a 50% open space rule that is sort of modeling already the half-Earth idea of E.O. Wilson. And this also was reaffirmed, as Fabrice pointed out, in Montreal at the recent COP15 for biodiversity. Every nation on Earth signing on to a 30% of the Earth's land surface, and maybe the oceans too. I haven't looked at the details, but 30% of the land surface protected for wild nature by 2030. This is an astonishing result. Underreported, but quite astonishing. If I had written it up as happening in a science fiction novel by the year 2023, no one would have believed it, but it happened in 2022. And it is truly significant as a sign that there's certainly reason for hope, because the world is taking notice in a way that they did not before the COVID pandemic emergency. Everything has accelerated since then. Things are happening that I would not have believed would have happened when I wrote Ministry for the Future in 2019. So one of the things I want to point out, because really the Ministry for the Future has become the book of mine that has got the widest audience for this moment, the biodiversity crisis, the poly crisis, as it sometimes is called. And yet, what I've learned since I wrote the book in 2019, and world events that have happened since then also, in combination, mean that I am more hopeful than I was when I wrote that book by a considerable degree. And I'll try to describe a little bit why. And I have to say, first off, briefly, that I feel this genuine hope in the face of very real negative headwinds, that the danger that we're in is quite extreme and existential. So it's a strange thing to talk about hope. And later on, I want to contrast hope to what has been called by the Slovenian philosopher Zizek cruel optimism, also Lauren Berlant, who made up the phrase, that you can't just say it's going to be all right, because we are in such danger of creating a mass extinction event, which would, in fact, hammer human civilization as well, that it isn't going to be all right unless we do things quite a bit differently than we have been in the very recent past. And so I'm not going to rehearse all of the dangers that we're in, because we all know them, and I want to focus on another part of the talk here in terms of things to be hopeful about. But one way to register the danger that I think is important is we've set a global average temperature rise of 1.5 degrees Celsius as a kind of upper boundary above which we should not go. It used to be 2 degrees, 1.5 is safer. These are not arbitrary limits. They are in the nature of trying to identify planetary boundaries, where if we were to overheat the planet beyond them, we are in danger of crossing tipping points and getting into runaway greenhouse effects that would be beyond our ability to claw back from. That being the case, these numbers are not to be considered as notional. They are physical boundaries that the scientific community has identified. And the IPCC is fully behind that, which is the biggest scientific community studying this stuff. Nevertheless, we've already heated the planet at like 1.1 or 1.2 degrees Celsius. And given everything that's going on in the continuous burning of fossil fuels and the wicked political battle over decarbonization ongoing, we are likely to have what people are calling a carbon overshoot, by which they mean more CO2 in the atmosphere, a higher global temperature average rise than has been called for. That's bad. It is not irrevocable, but it has caused new discussions to be initiated. And I want to talk about some of them as I go forward here. Say we heat the planet up to 2 degrees. In fact, we're on course right now, even with all the promises made under the Paris Agreement, to heating the planet to more like 2.4 degrees. We are going to have to suck CO2 out of the atmosphere and try to reduce the temperature before we get into the runaway effects. And that's going to be a scary time. And that's the 2020s. So as much as I want to focus this talk on reasons to hope, we are hoping in an extremely dangerous situation where action is necessary, to the point where we're in an all-hands-on-deck type situation, so that even ideas that you might previously have thought should be off the table are going to be on the table and discussed. If we're going to suck CO2 out of the atmosphere, we're really talking about billions of tons, which would be gigatons, and there's nothing to do with that dry ice. That CO2, you could inject it back into the ground. You can hope to uptake it in natural systems, but in the meantime, we may have heat waves that are deadly dangerous. So some people have been talking about geoengineering. I know in this particular community of these listeners that it is sort of a synonym for doing bad things to get out of what we have done so far without paying a cost. And when you define it as doing bad things, naturally it looks bad from the get-go. It is unprecedented and bizarre the idea of deflecting some sunlight by casting dust into the atmosphere like a volcano, this is called solar radiation management, in part to reduce the scariness of it by giving it a bland bureaucratic name. And people are naturally scared of it, including the scientists who are studying it. But it may be that we need to talk about it, the governance issues. How would we decide to do it? How would we do it? Could we do it once and then let the dust settle to the ground and 5 years later see what that cooling did for us, etc.? I want to encourage all of you to not have a knee-jerk reaction to the idea of geoengineering per se, because there are many interventions we can make in the Earth's geophysical system that might not have negative consequences and will be necessary to cool ourselves back down if we have a CO2 overshoot, which we're almost clearly going to have. Here's another example of an odd thing to put into the all hands on deck. There are a group of people saying that coal-fired plants, we've got to stop burning the coal. Those plants exist. They're connected to the grid. We need electricity. This is a health need as well as a convenience need. And certainly the developing world that doesn't have access to electricity, clean water, and health needs this stuff. It's now technically possible to maybe put in small nuclear reactors that are maybe fueled by thorium instead of uranium. In any case, like what the U.S. Navy has been using in their submarines, and to put those into these already existing coal-burning plants and not burn the coal to heat the water that runs the plants that makes the electricity, but rather have these small nuclears, power production things, heating units. One more generation, another 100 years of that. There are obvious downsides to nuclear power, especially the wastes, et cetera, and the centralization and the high costs compared to what we got. Nevertheless, these coal-fired plants have to be shut down. And then there are people who are campaigning to keep them going by having a non-carbon burning source of heat that is one that a lot of us have always considered to be too dangerous to be contemplated. Well, we're in a moment where the big danger is burning carbon and fossil fuels. So that too has to be back on the table. They have to be listened to. It has to be discussed. It's on the table for discussion. Be aware. Much easier to talk about and think about and hopefully to institute is drawing down CO2 by way of regenerative agriculture. Again, a lot of you will know about this. Marin County has some leaders in this movement. It's not at all unknown. It's not actually technically difficult, but it has to be scaled. We need to grow food for 8 billion humans. That means a lot of land is in production as agriculture. The way that we have been growing food, call it the Green Revolution for shorthand, was heavily fossil fuel dependent, and it depleted soil as well as using a whole lot of fossil fuel burning to get it done, not just for the fuel for tractors, but also the feedstock for fertilizers and pesticides. So regenerative agriculture has enormous promise because we will still need to grow food, and yet at the same time, you can draw carbon back into the soil. The way that we've been farming, particularly in the American Midwest during corn and soybeans, has depleted carbon to where it's down to about 1% by weight in the soil in many of these fields. And there is the capacity, it's not an infinite capacity, but it's a capacity for that same soil to uptake up to, say, 5 or 6% by weight, the carbon, sucking it out of the atmosphere while still growing crops. The amount of CO2 that can be drawn down into the soil by that method is simply vast. Some people have calculated it's about the equivalent of all the carbon we've ever burned up into the atmosphere since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So that won't happen, but the capacity being there, and since we do have to grow food for ourselves, to feed people, this is an extremely important thing to focus on, along with reforestation, et cetera, et cetera. So that too could be called geoengineering. And briefly, I want to point out that there are other more localized, and you might even say peculiar things that we can do that we kind of would help us enormously, that could be characterized as geoengineering, and yet there doesn't seem to be much in the way of a downside to these activities. There's no dangers involved. As in my Ministry for the Future, if we could pump water out from under the bottom of the glaciers in Antarctica and Greenland, we would slow those glaciers back down to their historic speeds, and sea level rise would be solved. Now, when I say that, that's a science fiction story. You have to understand that although it's a full glaciological community of scientists who have proposed the method, it hasn't yet been tried. The technologies are there. People drill through ice all the time. People pump water out from under ice. People pump oil out of ground, which is much more difficult. And it's rather intriguing to contemplate the idea that the oil industry, which needs to shut down and stop pumping oil up and burning it, could maybe be repurposed to practical uses to save our sea levels by using the same expertise, tech infrastructure, and people to pump water out from under the big glaciers of Antarctica and Greenland, rather than pumping oil out from under the ground. The logistical challenges would be huge. They would require the navies of the world. But we don't want these navies going to war. They are immense technological and human organizations that, if they could be used like the Swiss Army, which is also a military unit that does almost nothing except for rescue of civilians and landscape restoration work, if a couple of the big navies of the world were to help this process of testing out and then deploying perhaps the sucking out of water out underneath the glaciers, and if we save sea level, that too is geoengineering in a way, if you want to use that word, and yet completely harmless and indeed an amazing positive to be contemplated. There are other plans. People are talking about refreezing seawater in the Arctic to shoot seawater in the Arctic. If it gets open ocean, that is one of those runaway effects that could cook the planet. And so plans are being concocted at Cambridge University where to send small ships into the Arctic and shoot seawater up into the sky, not very far. This is rather localized for a geoengineering task, to the point where it would freeze, come back down as snow, as flocking, thicken the Arctic sea ice cover, keep that albedo, keep that heat from diving into the ocean, that sunlight heat. This is another plan that requires, what's interesting is it requires billions, but it doesn't require trillions, and it's trillions of damage that's going to be created along with the human suffering. So it's a bargain, but it's a lot of money and human effort that needs to be entrained to these kind of tasks. So that brings me to my next topic, which is money. How would we pay for all these great projects? We actually have technologies that are ready to go that would quickly decarbonize our civilization in ways that we need to do. But how do we pay for them? Capital in this world, which is a capitalist world, as you all know, goes to the highest rate of return. In other words, it gets invested where people, the investors, which means to say the money managers, these are not millions of individuals. These are a small group of powerful experts who run hedge funds and asset management companies and banks, both private and public. They have been trained and they're in the habit of investing at the, quote, highest rate of return. That highest rate of return is a miscalculation of biophysical and human reality. In other words, we're using a false rubric, a bad rubric, a destructive rubric, an index, a system of calculations that is encouraging capital to invest in short-term destructive, extractive, and unjust human work, rather than the opposite, the good work that we need. So the effort to reorient and, I'm going to say, force capital and big money to invest in good work is going to be both government and private business. Governments can set guardrails. They can also set rewards and incentives. Fabrice mentioned the big bill of the Biden administration, the IRA. This is a jobs bill, very much so, because the work necessary would be green work. That was huge, and it's just a start of what needs to continue to stay huge. So legislative action is, of course, important on the part of government to simply do stimulus spending kind of Keynesian way to get the private businesses and private capital to follow the lead that is blazed by government, by the people, government of the people, by the people, and for the people, to push the whole rest of the economy or pull it, to force it to invest green at the start. Now, in my novel, I also had that done by, rather than fiscal policy, which is legislatures spending money by law, there's also monetary policy, which is central banks creating money, fiat money, not cryptocurrencies, but fiat money from scratch to keep the economy running in tough times, sometimes called quantitative easing. It happened in 2008 after the financial crash that was caused by bad real estate investments. It happened in 2020 when the pandemic shut down so many businesses. There was quantitative easing and new money created and injected into the system. There is such a thing conceptually as green quantitative easing or carbon quantitative easing, where the original invention and creation of fiat money is deliberately spent on green projects first, and then it circulates into the general economy. I love it that this is an idea that has been taken up by the central banks. The Network for Greening the Financial System is an organization of 90 of the biggest central banks. They're talking about it. The International Monetary Fund, their special drawing rights is sort of designed for this. The governments, the central banks, could fill the first investments into COP27's loss and damage fund, which is a great fund to have, but is currently has no money in it. But the money could be put there first by governments in a kind of green quantitative easing to jumpstart investment. And now private capital, always looking for the highest rate of return. The world could go down and they would still be hunting for a short-term benefit, which is ridiculous, like trying to bet in a poker game on the Titanic. But nevertheless, that's how they're trained, and they have a fiduciary responsibility to that. They've been asking for risk-adjusted security. Okay, we'll make green investments in international. It'll be dangerous. If the World Bank will back, if they'll provide securities so that if we lose money there, we'll get paid back by the World Bank, then we will invest. Well, it's suspiciously similar to blackmail, but it has to be done because that's the way the world works. And it would be great to, speaking of blackmail, to simply force the World Trade Organization to green their trading laws. That's one of the most powerful international organizations on earth, more powerful than the Paris Agreement, which is a set of promises. But the World Trade Organization is a set of binding treaties, and it has legal power that even the Paris Agreement doesn't have. The WTO is a hidden spot where good things could happen. So this is a quick run through. And I want to end by bringing it back to the personal level of a group like Green Change, Marin County, and all of us. When I came back from COP26 in Glasgow, my mind was shattered. It's a big problem. There are thousands of people working on the solution. It's too big to comprehend. But then I had Cool Davis. Every town on earth has some kind of climate change organization, and you don't have to invent it yourself. You have to find it and join it, put your shoulder to the wheel. And as Fabrice said, as Joan Baez said, you take action. It is an antidote to despair. It's something you can do yourself in your own scene. In fact, I will just quickly say that my own most intense efforts since I got back from Glasgow a year and a few months ago, have been simply to restore a preschool to our village that got accidentally on purpose dismantled and taken away from our little village in West Davis. These little chores are important. They all add up like bricks in a wall. The wall is bigger than any of us can even comprehend. You can't see it, can't comprehend it. You have to trust and know that it's there. And then your brick, however tiny it might be, like even a piece of a mosaic, is part of that larger wall. And knowing that, I think, is one of the main ways of keeping hope. I want to say that it's a weird mental state that we are now forced to be in that combines both dread, real dread, and hope also at the same time, a kind of balancing act, almost a tightrope walk. If you feel the dread too strongly, you can fall off into the side of despair. If you feel the hope as being, oh my gosh, we really are on a roll here, because we are, compared to 2019 when I wrote my book. It is a different world now than it was even 4 years ago. Like a geological era has been passed underneath us by the pandemic and other things, the elections, the election of Biden, the election of Lula, the election of Petro in Colombia. The world is in a different space. But if you think, oh my gosh, we've got it, well, we don't have it yet. So that balancing act between dread and hope is maybe the name for the emotion of our time. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Fabrice and be very happy to answer a few questions before I listen to our other two guests, which I'm looking forward to. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Stan, for this great summary of where we are, for suggesting hope as the theme for this event, for writing your inspiring books, which means so much to us. I'd like to ask you a personal question before we go to text chat, which is, how can we inspire more people to find hope and take action? Since hope is the fuel for our climate action movement, how do we generate more of that clean fuel? How do we inspire people to feel hope and then find the energy to take action?
Well, one thing to try is this is a little bit of a judo move, but you have to point out that cynicism is a failure of the imagination and a dropping of one's moral responsibility. So I'm going to say hope is biological. Like bacteria have hope. I hope I've run into some food today. You know, I'm blind. I don't have any legs, but I just hope I run into food. Hunger is a kind of hope. And so once you have life, you have hope. But humans, we've got the internet. We've got an immense yammering, reverberatory headset on at all times, almost as if we're already in the metaverse, which thank God we're not. And it's all saying, oh my God, we're doomed. And to show that you're well informed is expressed by expressing cynicism. Oh my God, we're already doomed. This is a very common attitude. So one thing to do is to fight back against that and say, look, we're not doomed yet. Are you alive? This is often said by very prosperous people. What's interesting is that the people who are truly stressed, who are, and I mean on the biological life level, being in a hard place in the global South, they often are less cynical than the people who have time to hang out on the internet and yammer to each other about how bad things are. And I would even want to venture, this is maybe dangerous territory, but that whole thing on the internet, the fake cynicism, it's a kind of a male thing. It's a kind of a testosterone thing. It's a kind of strutting. Oh my God, I know how bad it is, and I am the great prophet of doom here. Well, it needs to be fought back against. And you could even put it in the terms of a gender critique. Like, there's toxic masculinity, dude, and you're in it. So maybe you ought to pull out of it. Now, on the positive side, how do you encourage hope? Start pointing out all these things that are going well. Start pointing out that the scientific community is an incredibly powerful engine of change. Start pointing out that private capital is actually saying, oh, I guess we got to go green or else we got no world to make money from. And so there are many reasons for hope. So you've got to do that dual action of attacking cynicism as being a faked and inadequate response, a kind of chicken response. And then also say, look, we're on our way. There are good things are going. You have to join the fight also.
Thank you, Stan. I'm going to ask a question by Chet Seligman, who writes that it is not clear to me that capitalism or socialism provides the economic incentives for sustainability. We need a starship economic instead. As a sci-fi writer, Stan, would you comment on the economy, on how the economy might be organized on a multi-generational starship, or how the population would earn a living?
Well, sure. I mean, I've done that in my novel Aurora. And I think what Chet Seligman is suggesting here, which is quite true, is we are on a starship, a multi-generational starship. It's called Earth. So on a starship that's small that humans have created, you have to have a completely circular, not just economy, but biological system. In technical terms, a closed biological life support system. That's what people do on space stations if they could do it. It actually is nearly impossible. Certainly at the lengths of time necessary to make a multi-generational starship, it's flatly impossible. As I said in my novel Aurora, people on those ships will die over a period of decades or hundreds of years, but they don't have enough time to get to other star systems. So that whole dream is shattered. But Earth, you have a continuous input of sunlight, you have an input of energy, and you have enough resources to support X billion people over the long haul. I don't venture to say what the carrying capacity for humans on Earth is, because nobody knows that, because it depends entirely on our technical and consumption habits. But I think what Mr. Seligman is trying to point out is we need a closed biological life support. We don't waste, where we don't use resources that are going to run out, but make a circular economy. I want to reference Kate Raworth, The Donut Economics. Her book is about this circular economy, that it runs in a circle with a hole in the middle and a vast void on the outside. The hole in the middle, nobody should fall into immiseration. So there's a human boundary on the inside of this economy. Nobody gets left behind. Nobody lives immiserated. On the outside, there is the geophysical boundaries of you can't crash this biosystem and get away with it. And therefore, that's an outer boundary. And these are true boundaries. One, perhaps moral, but crucial to get everybody on board. The other one, biophysical. So, yeah. And no, I want to put in I'll put in a vote for socialism immediately. Public ownership of the necessities, that these are all should be public utility districts and not for profit. Food, water, shelter, clothing, healthcare, education, electricity. These should all be not for profit. If you want to call that socialism, well, I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, is better than capitalism. I'll put it that way. These things should not be for sale. Some people shouldn't be benefiting from those, while other people suffer the lack of them. And I spend every Tuesday night helping my wife out as she feeds the homeless of Davis, California. And I'm going to say that if you had to choose between those two big names, which we do not, then I would instantly choose socialism over capitalism. But that being the case, that be that as it may, these are just big names from the 19th century. In the actual sense of where we are now, we need to do the specific things that create a donut economics, a closed biological life support systems. And I don't even care what it gets named, but it won't be capitalism, because that's not what capitalism is designed to do.
Thank you, Stan. We're going to pick another question from Gil Friend. How do we coordinate or control the independent entrepreneurial geoengineering initiatives?
It's harder than hell. We don't have a method, not only just geoengineering initiatives, but how do we control or coordinate, that's the best way to put it, all of the really great ideas that we have. How do we take the ones that are promising and scale them, to use the current tech speak, to quickly develop them fast enough to be helpful. I see that as one of the main things that we don't have in this society right now. It's a cacophony of over-information. There are tons of great ideas out there, and there's a whole lot of private capital out there. The Chinese central bank has $5 trillion in assets. Mark Carney's investment group that he gathered to go green at Glasgow has $130 trillion in assets. That's the world that we live in. So lots of great ideas, lots of capital that wants to invest and get some kind of a good return out of it. Let's not say the highest rate because that's badly calculated, but some kind of return to make it a business. How do you coordinate those? Well, the UN is trying, and even the UN is overwhelmed by this. So I would say this is one of the biggest problems that we have is that coordinating effort. And I'll tell you one place you can watch how hard it is and whether it can be solved or not is precisely in the Biden administration right now, having been given $350 billion to disperse over the next 10 years. That's like the New Deal, entire bureaucracy of coordination, evaluation, checking to see the results, and then reinvesting. All that has to happen. And so that's one nation, luckily the economically biggest nation. There are other nations that are crucial because they have way more people and are also big, India being the first one I think of, China being the second. And then the European Union is a complicated thing that wants to also coordinate this and is advanced in ways that no other, because they are a state of states where they have to coordinate nation states into a bigger, larger effort. The European Union is showing us how it can be done amongst individual nation state actors. So I guess in terms of leading the charge, these are the places to look. The United States, the European Union, India, and then also China, because China has that command control economy that where they could, in theory, say, we're going to do this and then do it. But I believe this question has pointed out one of the choke points, or one of the places where we're really not speeding along in an encouraging way, as far as I can tell.
Thank you, Stan. I'm going to read one more question. There's so many good questions that I think we will do a digest and then send it to you as you so generously offered, because otherwise we would never get to our next speakers, who have a lot to offer as well. But this question is from Mitch Radcliffe, who had many interesting questions. Do you see the potential for establishing a political process to assess the trade-offs that may emerge as we decide between different strategies, such as the case where we would remove CO2 quickly, but at the cost of negative results based on the UN SDGs? How do we organize ourselves to make these big, hard decisions?
Well, it's a great question. I guess it has to be the UN, and then the World Trade Organization, and the work of international diplomacy and politics kept at the level that hopefully avoids conflicts that lead to wars. So I think what this question points out is one of the primal strands of history over the next couple of decades is making exactly those accommodations, those cost-benefit analyses. And economics per se is, in theory, a social science that if you give it a task, it can do this work quantitatively. But most economics is just takes capitalism for granted and then works as a quantitative analysis of capitalism. If you were to give economic workers the tools, the task of evaluate these questions and help us, then maybe they might become useful in a way that they haven't been useful so far. But again, a great question. And I want to just end by saying what Fabrice was mentioning was afterwards, people will send me the list of questions that I didn't get to. I will quickly answer them in text I'll send it back to Fabrice and his crowd at Green Change. And then if they can send it out to the people who are interested or send it out to the entire list of people on board here, I'm happy to do that. I call it a velocity exercise. It's kind of fun. I hope it's not too superficial and stupid. But I appreciate people asking questions, and I don't like to go away without answering them, but we kind of have to do that because it's time to move on. So again, a thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Stan, for all you do, for your thoughtful insights, for your generosity. And I'm going to switch on. We're going to have another group discussion after we hear from the next two speakers. So those of you who want to chat about some of the questions you posed are welcome to do it. And I'm seeing a lot of people answering each other's questions, which is absolutely wonderful in text chat. So definitely keep that going. We will publish the text chat and we'll share it with all of you along with the video and the slides and all this. Our next speaker is Alma Soongi Beck. Alma is a Korean-American lawyer, surfer, dancer, seeking to inspire others to take action to end the climate crisis and reverse global warming. She is Climate Justice Co-Chair of the Climate Reality Project Bay Area, the co-founder of the Ecological Justice League, as well as a longtime organizer in queer, trans, and BIPOC circles. Her focus these days is climate hope, where she invites people who feel hopeless to harness their passion through dance and storytelling and revive their hope through action. Alma will talk about how to inspire joyful action to end the climate crisis. If you have any questions for her, please write them in text chat and we'll answer them in the next break. To kick off her presentation in style, here is a short video of Alma's joyful dance of hope at Earth 2050, our environmental festival in Marin last April.
We are made of each other, baby. You are my universe, and I just want to put you first. You are my universe, and you know that I'm inside my universe, my universe.
It was one of the highlights of our event. And I'd like to welcome Alma to the stage and have you take it away.
So thank you, Fabrice. Thank you, Stan, for your wonderful talk. 안녕하세요, 여러분. Hello, everyone. 새해 복 많이 받으세요. Happy Year of the Water Rabbit. 저는 백순기입니다. My name is Beck Soongi, or as known in the US, Alma Soongi Beck. One of my favorite parts about that video and that performance was I got to do it with Kevin Morrison from Green Change and my niece. That was my 17-year-old niece, Kira. So as Fabrice mentioned, I do a bunch of different things in the world: dancer, surfer, lawyer, climate activist. In addition to climate justice, co-chair work for Climate Reality Project Bay Area chapter, I also facilitate diversity equity programs for Sustaining a Life and United to End Racism. And I do some land back work in my law practice, land back to Indigenous communities. But today I'm here as founder and director of climatehope.us and dancingforclimatejustice.com. You can find us at those URLs. That means I'm here to talk about joy, hope, love, and connection. So take a moment, take a deep breath, and think about something that gives you great joy, something so wonderful it makes you burst with happiness. What is it? Dancing, singing, running, playing, family, friends, animals, climbing, art. The list is endless. Now think about how it's connected to action to end the climate crisis. Where could you organize here? Who could you talk to about it? How does your body feel? Can you imagine yourself talking about this every day? Or if not, once a week? Now, think about climate disaster. What comes to mind? Floods, atmospheric rivers, droughts, wildfire, deadly heat, the extinction of humanity. Now, how does your body feel? Can you still imagine talking about this and working on this every day or once a week? So what's my point? My point is that it's harder to move from a place of panic and fear. And it's also hugely unhealthy for us. It triggers our stress hormones, cortisol. What does joy do? It triggers our happy hormones, dopamine. Why does this matter? It matters hugely because to solve this global climate crisis, we need to reach everyone or almost everyone on a mass scale in a way that motivates action, sustained climate action. All those people in your office, on your street, in your family, in your school, all those people who are worried about the climate crisis but too scared to look at it, and who can move from a place of fear and panic. Some can, most can't. People that can are probably already climate activists. That's my guess. There are thousands of people around us who are hugely concerned about the climate crisis. The facts are there, the news, the science, but can we really even think when we're worried about the death of the planet? So, how do you talk to people who are too scared to look at the climate crisis? We start with ourselves, our mindset. Then from there, we offer perspective to people in our lives. The issue is not that people don't care. The issue is that people are scared and worried. And people don't want to think about more things to be scared and worried about. So, can we include in our climate conversations joy, hope, love, fun, play, connection, and community? This is the message of climatehope.us. Where did this project come from? In the summer of 2020, when the pandemic started, I was sitting at home in my living room, like the rest of us, and thinking about how can I motivate myself to work on climate in a consistent way in this very odd time where everyone's sitting in their living rooms. And then I thought, what brings me joy? And what could I talk about with people every day or week? There was no website, there's no social media on this, just an idea, a thought in my head. And if you've seen our websites, we now have several social media platforms and 2 websites. You'll know what it is for me. It starts with BTS and it ends with Korean pop music and dancing. If you don't know who BTS is, you really should. Look them up or ask your teenage friends and family. They're the biggest band in the world, 94 countries. They're a Korean pop band with 7 guys. And why did I start there? It's fun. People love to talk about them. They have a huge influence around the world. And for me personally, it gets me in touch with my own heritage as a Korean person. So guess who started talking about the climate crisis at the United Nations in 2021? BTS. On the heels of Blackpink, another hugely influential Korean pop group. And since then, BTS has continued to talk about climate and sustainability. If you want to see some of the latest, visit our homepage at dancingforclimatejustice.com. Join our email list. And if you want to see what we're up to at Climate Hope, joyful climate stories, joyful climate news, join our email list at climatehope.us. If you have social media interest and talent, we'd love to have you join our social media team. We're building exposure and influence with fun, joy, and love. But most importantly, think about the joy in your life. What gives you inspiration and hope? How can you have that conversation with family, kids, parents, neighbors, coworkers, friends? We want to know. Share it with us at climatehope.us and dancingforclimatejustice.com. Share with our socials, by email, with your comments. Share your joyful climate projects with us. We want to boost them and spread the message. Let this be the year that you infuse joy and hope into the conversation to end the global climate crisis. What do you love? Who are the people and places that you love? Who are the people and places that you want to protect? To close, I'll be sharing my screen and showing you our latest video. It's from a TikTok dance challenge with Taeyong from Big Bang. If you haven't heard of them, they were one of the biggest Korean pop groups about 10 years ago and a predecessor to BTS. And the other person is Jimin from BTS. So if you're wondering who the other people are that aren't me in the split screen of the video, those are my friends, Taeyong and Jimin. We're working on posting this video later this week on TikTok. It's kind of our new project and our new challenge to inspire people to wear climate gear in these TikTok dance challenges. We'll also be posting it on YouTube Shorts and Instagram. I hope it leaves you with a sense of joy and possibility on how to continue spreading the message of joy and hope and inspiring climate action for ourselves and for the people that we love. 감사합니다. Thank you. Hit it.
got that vibe, baby. Head to the gadget. Look at me, look at me, look at me, nudge. Look at me, look at me, now we got that vibe, baby. Head to the gadget. Look at you, look at you, look at me, nudge. Look at me, why survive? This gonna be the
All right. Thanks very much.
That was lovely. Thank you so much, Alma. Thank you for bringing joy into our lives and sharing this great way to help energize us all towards action. And I'm glad that you're coming back to Earth Day on April 23rd. So
Yes, I am excited to share a group dance experience. So please come to Earth Day. What are you calling it, Breeze?
Earth Day Marin. It's on April 23rd at the Mill Valley Community Center. And we will be telling you more about that at the end of the program. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, young climate activist Harita Kalvai. Harita is a senior at the Marin School of Environmental Leadership. She is the founder of Youth Action Through Art and head of communications for the National Youth Action Team at Citizens Climate Lobby, among other roles that she plays. Last year, she organized The Future We Create, which was a wonderful youth art exhibit that she presented with her team at our Earth 2050 festival, as you can see here. And Harita will tell us how youth can use art to fuel major social change and about the intersection of environmental justice, economics, and climate change. If you have questions for her, please write them in text chat. All yours, Harita.
Thank you. My name is Harita Kalvai, and today I'm going to be talking about intersectionality in the climate movement. Next slide. So before we start, I just wanted to say a little bit about myself. I'm a senior in high school, and I'm the founder of Youth Action Through Art, which I will be talking about later, as well as the head of communications for the Citizens Climate Lobby National Youth Action Team. So that's a national position, and I facilitate a group of youth from all over the country, and we make social media posts, and we do all the publication work for the National Youth Action Team. So if you follow CCL at all, and if you've seen any publications from youth, I am usually behind them. I'm passionate about social and environmental justice, and I'm interested in a future career in local legislation. Next slide. So Youth Action Through Art, that's what I'm here mainly to talk about today. It was founded in April of 2021, so we are coming up on almost 2 years now, which is crazy. And it consists of teens from all over Marin, mainly from Santa Fe. And we focus on local grassroots environmental efforts with a concentration on art and intersectionality. We are super focused on using art as a way to fuel social change because it is a universal method to do so. It transcends language barriers, it transcends social barriers, class barriers, economic barriers, everything. You know, anybody can look at a piece of art and appreciate it, and we want to use that appreciation and that universal love to fuel change. So some of the pictures that you see on the right are from our exhibits. So the piece that says Earth and Care on it, the collage, was one of our spotlight pieces at the Future We Create, which is an art gallery that we hosted in 2022. And we have one of our members holding a sign that says, "The climate is changing, why aren't we?" When we would go to the farmer's market and we would ask people to draw on a piece of poster board what they think that the world will look like in 50 years. And the picture right below that is from our very first event, which was a Zoom poetry webinar, where we asked teenagers how environmental issues affected them. And it was 2020, because this was when we were still, we were still in the works. We weren't a fully facilitated team yet. And wildfires were a major topic at this point. So that is what people mainly discussed. And the picture on the top is our logo. Next slide. So intersectional climate activism. I touched a little bit on intersectionality earlier, but basically what intersectionality means to me is that everybody should feel included in the climate movement. One of my biggest critiques of Marin County's climate movement is that it is not inclusive at all. And I feel as though a lot of climate activists, not all, obviously, but many climate activists shame people who can't fully participate in it. And I don't think that that's fair at all. Not everybody can afford to make such big changes in their individual lives. And that's why I think that we should celebrate people making as much change as they can make. Because even a small difference is better than no difference at all. And there's this huge narrative that the only way to make a difference, in the world of sustainability is by putting in all of this effort and completely changing your life. If that is something that you can do, and if that is something that you have the means to do, obviously, that's great. And you should be doing it. But, not everybody can. And that's why I think it's important for everybody to do what they can to the best effort that they can possibly do. Marin County is one of the most segregated counties in the country, and it is the number one most segregated in California, which makes climate change and environmentalism in Marin County just as big of a racial issue as it is an environmental issue, which is something that really needs to be addressed. Communities in Marin County that are made up of majority people of color are often vastly more affected by environmental issues than communities that are predominantly white. The biggest thing that I can think of is flooding. That is a big issue in low-income communities in Marin, and it is something that we need to address, that climate change does affect communities in different ways. And people in monopolies in power should be held accountable for their actions. Again, there's this huge narrative being pushed that individual action is the biggest contributor to climate change. It's our habits. And our habits, they do make up a considerable bulk of what climate change has become. But I also think it's important to note that 79% of carbon emissions come from 100 corporations. So obviously, individual people are not the main problem, and we should be focusing our energy on targeting monopolies. We should be focusing our energy on targeting our government and holding people in power accountable for their actions and the changes that they make to the world, because those often make such a bigger impact than just changing our individual actions. Next slide. So I can't vote yet. I'm still in high school, but as a future voter, I do believe that climate change and environmentalism must be discussed from a social perspective first. I am a firm believer that scientifically we already have everything that we need, or we're close to having everything that we need in order to make a positive difference in our world. I think right now we should be focusing on making sure that the resources that we have actually get put in practice, which is something that is mainly focused around the political world and making sure that people who have political power bring these changes into our lives. So that's definitely something that I will be thinking about as a future voter, and something that I think that all future voters, as well as all current voters, should be thinking about. And I also think, like I said before, that environmentalism should center around realistic sustainability for working class families, just because not everybody can always change their entire life. And I think that that's completely all right. And I think that a small change is better than no change. So everybody should just do what they can do. But most importantly, advocacy should focus on holding corporations and our government accountable, because they make the most difference to our environment. And by directly targeting them, whether, with our money or with our voices, it is something that we definitely should be thinking about first and foremost. Thank you, and please put all of your questions in the chat. I enjoyed talking to all of you today.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed your perspective and really appreciated that you shared it with us, Harita. I see a really great comment from Al Gromit. Thank you, Harita. We appreciate you as a climate champion. Karen is asking, what about the military? Well, I guess that would be for you, Harita.
Yeah, I'm so glad you touched on that. So the military is currently, I'm pretty sure, the biggest carbon emitter in the entire world, which is a very big deal. And when I was talking about holding the government accountable, I was talking about the government and just everything that the government controls. So the military is definitely included in there. We definitely should be focusing on sustainability on that front.
Wonderful. I see a question.
I have something to say about the military.
Go ahead.
Fabrice, just on the topic of the military, Climate Reality Project, Climate Justice Chapter, Climate Justice Team, we're working on a project to clean up the radioactive and contaminated sites from the military Navy base at Bayview Hunters Point. So if you want to get involved in actually trying to pressure the military to do a real cleanup of radioactive environmental waste, come join us in our climate justice team.
Thank you. Alma, we have a question for you from Carolyn Love. Thank you very much for sharing your inspiring work, Alma. I am curious, how do you see supporting Indigenous resistance and solidarity with Indigenous folks, particularly on Turtle Island and in California, as an integral to solving the climate crisis?
That's a complicated, multi-layered question. We actually have in our climate justice program at Climate Reality Project a whole arm of Indigenous voices that we've been working on for the last 3 years. So one of the first things I think is to educate ourselves about land back to Indigenous communities. Because if what we're looking at is the fact that those of us who don't have ancestry that traces back to this continent, who are living here, we're settlers and occupiers. And if what's happened is that we're living on stolen land, then we need to be thinking about how to make that right. And the obvious answer to that is to figure out ways to give it back to Indigenous communities. But to do that, I think it takes some thinking about our relationships with Indigenous people. There's a lot of Indigenous people who are still living on the peninsula and in San Francisco Bay Area and in Marin. And there are organizations of these Indigenous folks trying to figure out land back and other issues in terms of economic restoration and economic biodiversity. So I think supporting Indigenous voices and Indigenous communities is crucial. National Geographic actually did a report of how Indigenous people consist of 5% of the world, but protect 80% of our biodiversity. So I don't think we can solve the climate crisis without thinking about Indigenous voices.
Thank you, Alma. We have a question for Harita from Doug Eisinger. Roughly how many percentage of high schoolers do you think are well informed about climate issues and care about them?
I would say in Marin County, close to 100%. I think environmentalism is a big deal here. And I think that everybody at least believes that climate change is real and wants to make a difference. in high school, people of my age, I don't think I've ever met a single climate denier, which is really good. And I also just want to add that I think that in my generation, climate change is becoming a nonpartisan issue. I think in the past, people have seen climate change as a very politically left-wing issue and topic, but I don't really think that that is the case with my generation. I do know a lot of people who lean conservative who still believe in climate change and who still want to make a difference environmentally. So that is really promising. I would say that outside of the Marin County bubble and in the country as a whole, I think that there are a lot of regions that aren't getting adequate climate education. So I am lucky to live where I live, where environmentalism is championed, but I don't necessarily think it is everywhere.
Thank you, Harita. We have a great question for Alma from Al Grummett, who says, thank you for the message of hope, Alma. If people are having trouble aligning what they love to do with the work that the climate movement needs, what strategies would you suggest for them?
Oh, gosh. The question I would ask is, what do you love? Why are you doing this? And is it connected to something and people and places that you love? I don't think we're going to be able to continue a sustainable climate movement unless we can stay connected to why we're doing it, whether it's our people and our places. And the whole concept of hope, I heard someone describe it that it's actually not possible to be discouraged about the future because it hasn't happened yet. In some way, like there's some kind of philosophical perspective on that, which is like, if the future hasn't happened yet, then anything we're discouraged about is discouragement we have because of stuff that happened in the past. So those would be the questions. I mean, I wouldn't say it's impossible for everyone to figure out what are the things you love. But I think that if you're having a harder time with it, then maybe do a little soul searching, talk to the people that you love and ask them, maybe they have ideas about the things that you love, because I think we have to root ourselves there.
Thank you both for all these great insights. We have a great question from Bill Cole, which really applies to everybody here, to you too, but also to the rest of us. What messages are you advocating about how to be hopeful? Is it how happy you will be if we meet emission goals? Or is it more just feeling good because this is a good cause? Who wants to take this?
I can take it. I would say that it's a mix of both. I think that it is definitely important to look at emission goals and to try to strive towards them. But I also think that the entire environmentalist movement and the entire climate change movement is about making a difference because of something that you believe in or because of something that's happening in your community. So if you're fighting for something, I think you need to have a personal reason to do it. And I think that the greatest happiness that you can find within the climate movement is having a purpose behind your activism. So that would be my answer.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much for this. In the interest of the time, I'm going to thank our speakers. Thank you, Harita. Thank you, Alma. And thank you to all the great people who've been sharing insights and great questions in text chat. You really made a big difference today just by participating. That in itself is a valuable action. So we're going to go to the next section of our event, which is community tips. We have asked 5 community members to share short tips about climate actions that gives them hope that we can build a better world. And they each have 1 minute to share that tip. And Bridget, our content editor, is going to host this section of our meetup. Bridget?
Thanks, Fabrice. Am I unmuted? Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can find our collection of green tips for sustainable living on our Green Change website. And I myself, since I joined a couple of years ago, have incorporated a lot of these tips in my daily life. I hope you find them useful. So my tip is teaming up to heal the planet. And why team up? Kind of like what Stan said, when you're one building block in a bigger picture, you feel more powerful. So sometimes I feel like my individual climate actions are futile. But what gives me hope is when I see my small actions as a part of a bigger picture. So recently I was researching a number of organizations for a blog post I was doing for UCSF. And they were organizations that were working on the biodiversity loss and crisis. And each of the groups that I was looking at really gave me hope. They had a measurable goal, a strategy that included my individual efforts, and they had a way for you to follow their progress. So to me, it was like having an environmental Fitbit where I could look at how close I am, or we are, to hitting those 10,000 steps. This was just like Stan was talking about. They shared the same premise. Nature needs half of the planet's land and seas set aside to support healthy biodiversity in order to avert the worst aspects of the climate and extinction crisis. So here's a fun and doable one that I think is just a great idea. It's called the Homegrown National Park. The founder, Doug Tallamy, believes that you and I are nature's best hope. That's the title of his best-selling book. He advocates for small actions by many people. And his goal is if we can convert half of the privately owned land in the United States, which is about 20 million acres, into healthy ecosystems by planting native plants and removing lawns, which are ecological deserts, we can really impact the climate crisis. So here's where the Fitbit comes in. They have an interactive map so you can watch the homegrown park expand. And I think last year, when they started, they achieved their first goal of planting 55,000 acres. So consider finding a group that aligns with your interests and helps you to track progress. And I think you'll get a boost of hope like I did. Thank you. And next up, we have Al Grummett, who is a Green Change team lead, multimedia artist, is been our key person working with youth like Harita. You can see his very successful work, and he supports these youth in their activism and their art. Thanks, Al.
Thank you, Bridget, and thanks to the Green Change community for this great event tonight. So I want to share something that gives me hope, which is something pretty basic that you pick up as you get into environmental activism, which is just the simple act of asking elected representatives to take climate action. When I first started to do this, it took the form of campaigns where I would go and call a member of Congress's office or a senator. And I was just shocked that a staffer actually picked up the phone. They ask for where you live to confirm that you're a constituent. They write down what you're asking for. And then there's typically a follow-up, especially if you use an alternative means of communication which is by email. And so by emailing and calling representatives with specific asks, you're exercising your basic democratic rights. But what I didn't appreciate is how effective this is. And it formed the foundation of my approach to activism ever since, where I've gotten involved with groups like Citizens Climate Lobby, where we make specific asks to our members of Congress to take specific climate actions. And I have found that this is not only the most effective form of climate action, but also the most hopeful. And you could start with baby steps. You can just start by sending an email introducing yourself to your members of Congress or to your local elected officials or your state elected representatives, stating that climate is an important issue for you and that you are an environmental voter. You can also sign up for the Climate Action Now app, which is a wonderful app that makes it very easy for you to participate in environmental campaigns and take climate actions from your phone with the greatest of ease. So there are a lot of really effective ways to get started with this basic action of just asking elected officials who hold the power to make the changes that we want to see happen. Citizens Climate Lobby, the link to sign up for the Marin chapter is in the chat. And on February 15th, we will be hosting Congressman Jared Huffman for a conversation about his priorities and climate actions that he's prioritizing in his agenda. And so join the chapter and participate in that conversation. It'll be a great way to kick off this particular tip. Thank you.
Thank you, Al, for that great tip. Next, I want to welcome Susan Gladwin, who is a local green businesswoman and sustainability expert. She has the organization, green business called Ready, Set, Replace, which I heard about recently, that helps homeowners to prepare to replace their gas water heaters with efficient heat pumps. Susan's running for Mill Valley City Council coming up this March. So thank you, Susan.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. And I'll just mention my day job is working at the U.S. Department of Energy on helping with the clean energy transition. So I just want to ask, what do electric-powered buildings, public charging stations, and affordable transit-friendly housing have in common? They're all climate solutions, but they're all also things that are done by cities. So cities' action is really a climate solution, and that's why running for office is a climate solution, whether it's at the city level or elsewhere. I personally never thought that I would be running for office, to be honest. I offered to help on some of these types of solutions. I found myself getting involved in city task force with some of the folks on this call, helping on our climate action plan. And little by little, as you get more involved, you become kind of known as somebody who will step up and be encouraged to run, which is what has happened to me. I will say, as a first-time candidate, it's a bit daunting. But the great news is that people will help, and people are really helping, especially when they know that you prioritize climate change as something that's important and will do something about it. If running for office by itself is too daunting, I would also suggest you could look into serving on committees or commissions throughout wherever you live. Planning commissions, of course, have a lot to do with climate, the built environment, and so forth, but emergency preparedness types of commissions, even parks and rec or arts committees, et cetera, you can always weave something to do with climate change in there. As I mentioned, you can't do this alone. It is really a team effort working with your constituents and your stakeholders. So the last thing you can do that is really valuable is to support climate forward candidates. And because as I've come to learn, that fundraising is so critical in order to get the word out and get the vote out and get your message out and stand out from the others who are in the race. That's the case with me. So I would love your support, and I'll put a donation link. You can donate from anywhere. I have people from all over the country donating because they want to support climate forward candidates and ways to follow on our campaign. So I really appreciate your support and look forward to seeing some of you out there. It's a great life experience as well. So please join me. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. It's very, very exciting to see someone who is such a climate activist going for that kind of role. So thank you for all you're doing. Next up is Christine Strognall, also a Green Change team member, nonprofit communications expert, and writer and author. And she is going to talk about her tip, which is make real change happen.
Thank you. I just wanted to talk about the thing that's been most inspiring to me lately. So I do a lot of work with Resilient Neighborhoods, which basically shows how you as a household can move towards carbon neutrality. And it's a fantastic organization. I recommend it to everyone. But at a certain point, as many people tonight have mentioned, you think, well, what difference does it make if I personally reduce my carbon footprint when there are really such huge issues out there? I had this really wonderful affirming experience, which is I was talking to a friend of mine who is one of 5 people in Fairfax who were activated by seeing a young man walk around the city posting swastikas that said, "We are everywhere." So this group, the DA did not prosecute. And when they were all up in arms about why the DA didn't prosecute, they learned that what the young man had done did not constitute a hate crime. It constituted a hate incident. And so, of course, many people were outraged. And of those many, 5 stayed the course. They ended up trying to change the law, and they were successful. They changed the law as of January 1st this year. You cannot go posting stuff like that in public places because it is now officially a hate crime. So what I found so moving about that is that they didn't really think that they could have this kind of impact. I think, was it Kim Stanley Robinson who talked about us as being tiles in a mosaic? We just don't know how important one particular tile can be, but they took a stand on something that was very important to them, and I should be to all of us, which is freeing our society from this kind of hate crime. And they pushed it through with good luck and a lot of hard work and a lot of willingness to work with each other and to compromise and to keep on pushing. 5 people changed a law that affects 35 million Californians. So every now and then when I think, oh, what can I do? I'm just like, I remind myself of that. What could 5 people do? They can change a law that affects 35 million Californians. So who am I to say that if I'm not, that I can, that I am, that I can't be effective? I can be effective. I just have to keep working at things and looking for opportunities to make a bigger difference. So that's my, and I wrote an article about this. This photo is from Marin Magazine, which published that article in the January issue. So I encourage you all to read it and start thinking about in what ways could you perhaps have an outsized influence on something that really matters to you. Thank you.
That is a really inspiring story. Thank you, Anne-Christine. And last up, Fabrice doesn't really need any introduction. He is our founder for Green Change and many other things, and also a relentless climate activist. So thank you, Fabrice, for everything. And he's presenting his tip on share your climate actions.
Thank you, Bridget. And I also want to point out that all of the previous presenters' tips are linked in text chat. So if you want to read more about what any of us has suggested, you can read it there. My tip is share your climate actions. Sharing is such a great way to engage people to take climate action. By sharing your own climate actions that you've already taken, you can inspire your friends and neighbors to take them in their own lives. Hearing your experience will give them confidence that they can follow in your footsteps and do the same. You can share your actions in many different ways, from in-person conversations with people you know, to public presentations at community meetings, and of course through email and social media. That's a good use for it. It doesn't matter if the action you're sharing is large or small. You can be a positive influence, whether you're sharing a healthy recipe for eating sustainably or tips about riding an electric bike or installing solar panels in your home. And I know often when I post these kinds of tips online or when I share them in forums like these, I often get contacted by folks or people will post comments and it starts a conversation. And that conversation is gold because we're all social animals. We pay attention to what people around us are doing. And if we see our neighbors taking a climate action successfully, it often makes us want to do the same. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to share more, to act as role models for our community, and to be the change that we wish to see in the world. So I also encourage you to check our Green Tips page for more Green Tips. And if you'd like to share a tip of your own on a topic that we haven't already covered on the Green Tips page, email us and we'll get you set up. And we keep adding these Green Tips. The collection is getting larger and larger all the time. We invite everybody to take action in ways that make sense for your situation. There's so many different ways that we can actually make a difference. We also have, besides our Green Tips from our community, we have climate action guides, which are also linked in text chat, and which contain all sorts of great online resources linked to the best online resources for each of those topics, whether it's LED or home batteries or organic food. And you can find all this at greenchange.net/action. These are just some examples of the guides. So I'd like to thank all of our speakers: Kim Stanley Robinson, Alma, Soongi, Beck, Harita, Kalvai, and all the members of the Green Change team for making such a wonderful event possible. And of course, thank some of the many partners who support our work and keep us going. Look at that. There's so many of those. And then I'll close the event by telling you about our next event, which is Earth Day Marin. It's going to be a big environmental festival on April 23rd, 1 to 5. Ignore this little typo. And all afternoon. And it'll take place at the Mill Valley Community Center. The link is in text chat. We encourage you to sign up. It's just an amazing event. Last time we had 1,200 people. We had some of the best climate activists in our area, all, exchanging information with each other and having fun at the same time. We offer a wide range of activities, exhibits, arts, electric vehicles, music, speakers, and it's an amazing experience. And it was such a success that we are now making this an annual event. And it's our biggest project of the year because it's a ton of work, but it's such a wonderful opportunity to bring everybody together and to learn from each other, to enjoy great tunes and food and wonderful speakers and amazing art. And there they are again, yada. Activities for the children. So it's family friendly. It's for people of all ages. And there's free ice cream from Strauss Creamery. What's not to love? We invite you, if you're interested in this, to consider volunteering with us. Here's the Earth Day team from last year, and we're looking to bring a few more community leaders like you to make this event happen and reach its full potential. And if you're an exhibitor or a potential sponsor, look at the lineup of folks who are supporting this event or supported last year, and we expect them to support it this year. It's a great promotional opportunity to reach qualified customers who are interested in climate action. And it's particularly interesting for green businesses, but also for climate action groups and civic action groups. So there it is, Earth Day Marin. I hope you can join us, and we hope we'll see you there. And don't forget that you can always join other events than ours. And Marilyn Price on the Green Change team curates this amazing Green Change calendar with the help of Bridget, which you can access at greenchange.net/calendar. And it's chock full of amazing events. I don't know how they do it, but every event on that calendar is interesting should you want to learn more. So please join us. Subscribe to the newsletter. If you use Facebook, join us there. And we hope to see you at the next event at greenchange.net. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful spring and a wonderful year, and look forward to taking climate action with you all. Take care.